I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're unraveling the mystery surrounding the final days of Edgar Allan Poe with a terrific writer. His name is Dwight Thomas, and he has penned a wonderful book. It is called Mr. Poe and Dr. Moran, a medical biography of Edgar Allan Poe. This fascinating biography dives into Poe's final moments, revealing the controversial role of Dr. John J. Moran, who was both a comforter and fabricator of Poe's deathbed story. With exclusive access to previously hidden documents, Dwight brings new insights into one of literature's greatest enigmas. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Dwight, great to see you here today on Spotlight. Thank you for joining me, my friend.
Thank you so much, Logan, for taking the time to talk to me. And there are not too many people who want to talk to me these days, and they're trying to sell me a hearing aids or a pitch on a political candidate.
We're not here to sell you hearing aids. We're not here to pitch political candidates. We're here to talk about your great book. What made you decide to investigate the life and death of Edgar Allan Poe?
Well, I'm not exactly a novice. This is 1987, 37 years ago. This is a very big scholarly book called The Prologue, which had very wide circulation in university libraries. It's a book for scholars and for research libraries in terms of its expense and ability to hold it up and read it. It's not really designed to be read cover to cover. I wanted to do a briefer book which would be readable and accessible to a larger audience. This is the Mr. Poe and Dr. Moran, because there are quite a few things that people don't quite understand with regard to Poe's medical condition and his last illness. Of course, the Moran published in 1885 a little pamphlet called A Defense of Edgar Allan Poe, which is the most widely circulated. In fact, it's just about the only widely circulated account of Poe's final hours, and of course, it is a fabrication. He didn't put anything in it that would tell the truth. It was all fibbery, and he made a career out of lecturing on the topic.
It's amazing, the final hours of Edgar Allan Poe, according to, lore at least. He died at 40 years old. He was pronounced dead, but his heart continued beating for hours. Now, is that true or not true? What do you attribute it to? Tell us a little bit about that aspect of the mysterious.
That is speculation, because we don't have any documentary evidence. So this thing which he wrote a pamphlet. He started to get this in 1875. When the Baltimoreans were putting a graveside monument, and there was a lot of fanfare. They're putting a monument over Poe's grave in 1875, and he started to publish in a newspaper. A few years later, he got involved with lecturing on Poe, which were widely received. And the important lecture he gave was in Washington, D.C. on February 1st, 1882. Which filled up the largest auditorium, the First Congregational Church, which was the largest auditorium in Washington. And he introduced certain ideas, which the explanation which was given in Poe's standard biography. At the time, the standard biography was written by his close acquaintance, Rufus W. Griswold, who didn't like him at all, and he wrote a biography which portrayed Poe as a malicious drunkard and somebody you really couldn't trust. I was one of the providers of this book, of course, is that where have you got? I've got. It's oh, haven't admits that. Where did we get there? But anyway, anyhow, this is a portrait of illustrations. If you're interested in that, it's not only that I'm very concerned to get the authentic documents and go back to the authentic documents and explain why other documents. I tried to do that readably, but this is unquestionably a scholarly book, which is supposed to be for people who want to know something about that, but it's also people who would be writing on American literature or people who have scholarly credentials on American literature. But I tried to do both of them. I don't know exactly whether you do both of those things, but most biographies of Poe are enormously unsatisfactory because they do not make the distinction between sort of Apocrypha, which was sort of inserted into the public image of Poe and things that happened. He was sort of picked up on October the 3rd, 1849 in a polling place, which was also a tavern. And of course, Griswold sort of said, well, this is where he went to the rum shop and he overindulged in alcohol, and that brought about his end, which of course is unfortunately truthful, but people didn't want to accept that. 1860, he did really first great fabrication or Apocrypha. John Reuben Thompson had him being sort of going into Baltimore and being picked up by a group of ruffians who wanted to vote him in the election. So he was, so to say, cooped, imprisoned in a cellar all night and taken out in the next morning and voted at 11 different polling places. This cooping has a factual basis to it that they did American elections in the early national period, and perhaps pretty much throughout. They didn't have photo IDs back then. So if you were any sort of a white man and you went to the polling places, you could vote. This sort of led itself to finding white men who didn't have anything to do, and you could sort of offer them free drinks, and they were sort of carried around from one polling place to another. But this was election fraud. That was common. And what was common, of course, and what was inserted in the newspapers with regard to sort of exaggerating things, that sort of they had sort of special dungeons where you kept the voters and took them out the next day, sort of seat bound together and forced to vote. That is fabulous. What really got involved with regards with the fabrication with John J. Moran is that they first wanted to deny anything about the election. What he did was try to do something. If you were talking about someone having an alcohol, anything to do with alcohol consumption back in the late 19th century, because the overwhelming political movement was prohibitionism. They got so powerful they actually did alter the Constitution in the year 1920, something known as prohibition, which made it illegal to sell, transport, and we're not talking about hard liquor. We're talking you couldn't buy a glass of beer or a glass of wine. This was not only everywhere in the United States, all American territories, all American ships. It's a very broad thing, which it didn't work. But you forget about it. This Poe is, of course, not a drunkard. The idea that he had an alcohol consumption disorder was very apparent to people who knew him. This is what his friends said, that he could not tolerate alcohol and he would be better off if he didn't have anything to to do this, but they liked him nonetheless. Herbie Allen in his 1920, this is 100 years ago, used the word dipsomaniac. Nobody would use the word dipsomaniac these days. Of course, back 100 years ago, everybody would have been familiar with that term as a standard term in medical terminology. It was not, you couldn't use that today without being laughed out of context. Alcoholic is a term which is 20th century term, but that has a problem that most people are going to sort of swerve over in their imagination to the Skid Row derelict, somebody, and you still see that today, and that is the visible image of alcohol consumption disorders, and they're very. You need to make discriminations, and not too many people are prepared to make discriminations. I'm using in my book the term of making discriminations of E.M. Jelinek's 1960 book, The Disease Concept of Alcoholism. If you say alcoholism, people can be very functional and they can be, if you will, performance alcoholics. And that is different from, say, all the other drugs that people become addicted to these days. You can't sort of speak of a performance heroin addict or the other things which render you inoperable. But alcoholics can perform at a very high level, and they can be chairman of the board or chief stockbrokers, and you don't pick up on what is going on in their personal lives with regard to alcohol consumption. Alcohol is an immediate source of energy in terms of caloric value, and people want to study alcohol consumption. It really is not done. They put you down, they turn you off when you mention the topic, but it needs to be better understood. And what happens if you become alcoholic and what is likely to happen to you. And Poe was what E.M. Jelinek would call a gamma alcoholic. And these are people who tend to binge drink. And they drink and they go on a bender and they are rendered, unable to
Incapacitated,
function.
usually.
They have to be put to bed and they have to wind up in the emergency room, but then they have a period of 6 months or even a couple of years in which they don't drink anything. So these are people that go on the wagon and try to stay on the wagon. Do they succeed in staying on the wagon? They're usually as people who are as constrained by their circumstances and by the society they live in. This isn't.
Right, I was going to say you did a wonderful job researching this book. So many great new facets of information that we were not aware of before. I think the audience is really going to enjoy it. The title of the book is Mr. Poe and Dr. Moran, a medical biography of Edgar Allan Poe. This fascinating biography dives into the author's final moments, revealing the controversial role of Dr. John J. Moran, who was both a comforter and a fabricator of Poe's deathbed story. Dwight, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight. Wonderful work on this book.
Well, thank you for having me. And of course, if you're wondering, most newspapers do not review books these days. They don't have the staff, and trying to get a book reviewed and anything that comes out with there's a Britney Spears autobiography that automatically gets reviewed, and if you say this is something which is perhaps intellectually challenging, I'm not too sure. And of course, you never know how much the celebrity had to do with writing the book in the first place. But this is something where I try to put in the documents, if you were looking for a reference book and a readable biography, and it's sort of a hard task to bring off doing that. I did the best I could on that, of doing a book which would be interesting to a large number of people who might not be professional scholars,
I agree.
interesting to libraries which might not acquire reference books and hopefully reasonably priced. And that was a concern to me because many of the scholarly books, the university presses, they put something between boards and they want to charge you $150. And I wonder who you're writing for. You're writing for probably
Exactly.
the people who contributed. It
Yeah.
is what you call publish or perish.
Well, you did a wonderful job on this book. It's very readable, it's entertaining, it's very credible and well researched. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next
Well,
time.
thank you again for putting me on your show, even briefly. Obviously I haven't got time to explain everything about the book, but
Yeah.
you can find it in the usual Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and order it through your bookstore. It's readily available these days, and it's not too expensive.
All right. Thank you, Dwight.
Well, thank you, Logan.